Again, 173-page report. We're going to go through this pretty quickly. Project team that was contracted by New York State Department of Ag and Markets was Ecology and Environment Incorporated and Energy and Environmental Analysts Inc, EEA. The next three slides were purloined from Steve Sanford, Dave Adams, and Eric Kaza, respectively. And I wanted to put them up front to illustrate. These were back from 2009, and at the beginnings of the Invasive Species Task Force, the issues and the concerns and components and elements of what invasive species control and management planning would need to be in New York State. And these things, reoccurring issues and themes, and this was a kickoff for the project team not to reinvent the wheel and not to create issues that were not focused issues that have already been identified. So there's not a tremendous amount of new information in the report, but it's more of a collation or a coordinated, organized discussion and report on who's doing what are they doing, and what are some of the issues where no one is doing anything. So these reoccurring themes on the next three slides illustrates the elements or components of invasive species control and management. And I do really like this one. It shows how complex, but down in the middle, up middle top is coordination. Without coordination, none of these things really occur. And it's zeroing in a little bit closer to the ground, into the weeds, so to speak, on mapping and creating a library. And I won't begin to interpret this slide on what all the boxes mean, but want to focus on the coordination part and organized coordination. And Eric's slide here, and these are things that jumped out at me over the years in looking at presentations, sitting in on the meetings, and trying to get our cumulative heads around what New York State has, what may be lacking, and what it needs moving into the future based on uncertainties and adaptations and everything else goes with that. So again, the commonality, effective coordination, useful guidance, and again, one thing that I came away from that struck me from the sessions in Ithaca, the training sessions, was locally led response. And it's not as simple as saying this is a bottoms-up approach where regions and localities should dictate what priorities are. But it's more of a local led response using all the guidance and resources that the state and federal agencies can make available. And slide number 6, again, it's RFP language, what we were charged to do. And the operative phrases are all taxa of invasive species and the phrase framework that identifies and recommends. And having said that, it doesn't get any easier trying to figure what we would be doing with the project and the kickoff project and how to follow it through to the end, which is final recommendations. And the next slide, identify those components necessary for the development and implementation. And again, this is RFP language and what products we needed to focus on and develop at the end of the day and in the final report. And I think what this is saying is tell us something we don't know. And that was a very difficult thing because there's an awful lot known about invasives, vectors, pathways, and ecological threats and ecological impacts. But our challenge was to do that and provide useful findings and recommendations to move forward. Project schedule, go through this real quick. March 16th was the RFP issue date. Project award was July 2nd, 2009. Project start date was May 19th, 2010. A little bit of a lag, but we did get started on May 19th. And project completion was August 19th, 2011. Project approach, identification, organizations, other stakeholders, categorization of composite listing, stakeholder contacts and questionnaire, literally revisiting the initial questionnaire that the Invasive Species Task Force circulated amongst stakeholders, agencies, and a whole cross-section of invasive species experts, professionals, non-government organizations, and modifying that questionnaire to reflect 2010, 2011 conditions and what was new and what has changed. So that was a recirculation and an analysis of responses. The funding challenges, another section of the report. Where does money come from? Where does funding come from? Where can it come from? What might the state be missing? What might regions in the state, as big as New York State is, be missing with funding? Capacities and means to address functional areas. Again, this goes in depth in the report, and it's difficult to even summarize what some of these sections are. But if we don't understand our limitations and capacities with regards to individual species or organizations, it's easy to chase our tails and waste energy and valuable time in addressing specific issues. Incorporation of the New York State Aquatic Nuisance Species Plans and other initiatives that the State Department of Environmental Conservation and the Invasive Council supports to move that into form of policy and regulatory support, very important. And next steps. Identification, agencies, organizations, and that's fairly self-explanatory, but again, everybody is doing very specific things. Some agencies are doing a whole bunch of specific things, and it was an organization of that data and for the outcome to understand just what that looks like. Stakeholders, the myriad of stakeholders, and again, going back to all taxa, the roles of research, restoration, post-invasive species control, the prevention, the research into pathways and vectors, and what might be around the corner. Early detection, rapid response are the functional areas. And again, all species, aquatic, floral, faunal, microbial, disease, etc. Outcome, an analysis, evaluation of that statewide organization based on functional areas. The infrastructure of invasive species control and management in New York State, the outlined, graphed, listed areas of expertise, prioritization, and redundancies were included in the report in its respective section. Stakeholder contact and questionnaire, again, a revised, modified initial stakeholder prepared by the Invasive Species Task Force early on. Face-to-face interviews, phone calls, and a number of media type of contacts, whether in person, different people, different organizations, the hierarchy, the administrative levels. And one thing that occurred over and over in our contacts is people and representatives saying, well, I don't know if I can speak for the agency, or I don't know if I can speak for the organization, which was a challenge to the project team, is how do we credibly render or evaluate and assess those responses. But that was a result unto itself, saying that the positions of specific agencies or specific organizations and academic institutions could be better developed, and there could be a better consensus of opinion and a consensus for a scientific approach to move forward. Just a little anecdote on the questionnaire and the interviews. Funding challenges, capacities and means to address functional areas. Funding issues, part of the questionnaire. Who's doing what? Where do they think they're getting money? It doesn't get much more challenging than now on the federal level and on the state level. Nothing looks good. And there's other states that are in, I'll say, a similar situation, possibly a worse situation with regards to resource allocations for not just corrective measures, but for conservation and prevention, and actually carrying out the charges of some of the resource protection agencies. Existing staff resources, analysis of existing successful programs. Sometimes it's an identification of who's left in departments or organizations. And I think that comes into the lobbying efforts in the development of a consensus and an approach to have certain elements of the invasive species community make the strong case that these things are critical, and this is why, economically and ecologically. And again, the functional areas, the outcome and development of an administrative matrix of how the invasive species system works as far as the governmental agencies and the local agencies and municipal response, etc. GIS database, opportunities, existing activities, and boy, there were some really bright spots as we worked through our analysis. The IMAP Invasives program is very well respected amongst pretty much everybody we interviewed. There wasn't any downside other than how can it be developed faster and how can we implement it at the multi-levels of experience, people on the ground to use it and get it into the academic institutions so that it becomes a response that, yeah, this is what we would like to move with in New York State and make it a universal application. But other states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Ohio, have spoken very highly of the IMAP approach. And sometimes, unfortunately, other states think, well, you guys got it all together, you have it all figured out. Well, we have it far from all figured out, but appearances can be deceiving sometimes. Evaluation of existing programs, the Lake Champlain Basin Aquatic Nuisance Species Plan, Adirondack Aquatic Nuisance Species Plan, all of these have evolved in the past 12 months in a very good way. But what the report, not being a snapshot in time, but analyzes how some of these programs got to be where they are through the process, how they've developed, and through being very creative and adaptive, how they're moving forward. And there's some strong lessons learned there. We're all after biological functional integrity, resource uplift. These are all the buzzwords. What does that mean to the practitioners on the ground, and how is this interpreted? And again, that moves into the sustainability, the S word. What does that mean in light of invasive species? It's a lifelong and multi-year endeavor to even think about suppression or recovery in many, many areas. Defining the trajectory, interaction with project sponsor and key stakeholders. I think that is a huge, I'm not going to say a black hole, but how does that happen? You can't have enough interaction, collaboration with key stakeholders. And I think the project in some instances illustrated the fragmentation and disconnect. Some people are so focused and so close to the ground on local and micro environments and regional issues, and that they don't always take a step out of that comfort zone, if you will, for lack of a better phrase, to understand policymakers and government officials and local government organizations who don't have a clue of the biology of invasive species and the potential threats. So we could go on for a long time about the collaborative benefits of doing that. But that's something that jumped off the page when all was said and done with the report to me. And primary recommendations, this was excerpted from the executive summary of the report, and it's represented by 4 or 5 pages in section 4 of specific recommendations, where these 5 are embellished and articulated further. It really is about securing and providing adequate funding and staffing. These things can't get done without the human resources. Coordinate and distribute, and coordinate's the universal word that moves through the report as far as being a priority activity. Ensure that the Council and the OISC, Office of Invasive Species Coordination, have the resources and staffing. And again, I've said this a number of times inside and outside the project team, the infrastructure that's been set up in New York State is incredibly effective. It needs to be supported. It needs to be managed adaptively to put the human resources and the funding in the right places. How that happens isn't this project team's charge. What we put together in the report, hopefully, is enough supportive documentation and data to say that this infrastructure is in place and this is how it was designed to work, and it hasn't gotten to that point yet. And I think how it moves forward is what is critical, the objective of the report. Adaptive management methodologies, invasive species, as most all on this call know, is the perfect marriage between adaptive management techniques and methodologies, given the uncertainties and given the complexities of actual control and running through all the scenarios of control, suppression, eradication, and further on down the line, site-specific conditions that change. The Council, the Office of Invasive Species Coordination, collectively with all the state agencies, really need to put more emphasis on prevention and control. And this leads to the connection with federal agencies, even Homeland Security, and some of the overlaps with biological terrorism and things, and policy decisions and protection mechanisms that can only be handled on the federal level with state input. Some of these global issues that really affect New York State and all states can't be handled just by a local or a regional or a statewide approach. So again, I'll stop with primary recommendations. I think we pretty much said it all, and Rachel is here with me, and I think she wanted to say something about the report in general, the objective of the report and what it is.
Sure, thanks, Paul. Basically, Paul had mentioned this a little briefly in the beginning, but you know, when we had some feedback in the stages of producing and collecting information for this strategy report, and I had questions coming my way that were kind of directed at, you know, is there anything new or novel, or is there anything that's been found through collection of information with the surveys, the questionnaires? And I wanted to say that there was this great, you know, this information that we had unlocked with all these great professionals in the field of invasive species in the state and across the country. But what we found really through questionnaires and through all of our research was that this strategy that we've created is really a tool that brings together lots of already existing and known information on invasive species management control that people know this information, but we hope that it's a resource that people can use in a consolidated effort that brings together information that isn't necessarily novel, but is all the important points that were reiterated time and time again in questionnaires and communication with those who are, at the ground level and those at the top, as far as what's important and how we can further our efforts statewide.
So, thanks, Rachel. And with that, one of my favorite Jerry Carlson slides, Emerald Ash Borer in your face. I